Prepare for human origins. Welcome back to Season 2.
Welcome to your dose of wowness. Now, think back to what you were probably taught in biology class. The story most of us learned about where we came from goes something like this. About 200,000 years ago, in a very specific part of East Africa, a single population of hominins crossed a threshold. They developed a high, rounded brain case, a flat face, a chin. They started making tools, and eventually a group of them packed up and left Africa roughly 60,000 years ago, spreading out across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. And the narrative was that they just kind of replaced all the archaic populations they found living there. It was a very clean, straightforward, and powerful story. And for decades, that single origin story felt completely bulletproof. It was held up by two massive pillars of evidence. First, back in 1987, there was this landmark genetic study that traced the maternal ancestry of all living humans back to one single African population. They called her mitochondrial Eve and pegged the date right around 200,000 years ago. And then we had the fossils to back it up. Over in Ethiopia, researchers found the Omo Kibish and Herto skulls. These skulls had essentially modern anatomy, and the dating put them squarely in that 160,000 to 195,000 year window. So, case closed, right? East Africa was the one and only cradle of humanity. But here is where things get messy, because the answer didn't just sit still, it kept moving. The whole model got turned upside down in 2017, and honestly, we're still figuring it out. The spark for this huge pivot came from a cave site over in Morocco called Jebel Irhoud. Now get this, fossils from this exact site had actually just been sitting in museum collections since the 1960s, completely misdated to just 40,000 years ago. But when researchers finally applied new thermoluminescence dating techniques to some burned flint they found right alongside the bones, well, the timeline just shattered. The date came back at 300,000 years. That is 100,000 years older than the oldest known Homo sapiens at the time. And the location, the anatomy, it tells a deeply complex story. Morocco is in northwestern Africa. That is literally the opposite side of the continent from that supposedly singular East African cradle we were just talking about. Plus, the anatomy of these fossils totally shifts our understanding. When you actually look at the Jebel Irhoud individuals, you're looking at a face and teeth that are totally modern. The midface is flat, it's retracted. But then the brain case is elongated and lower vaulted, which looks way more like earlier archaic hominins. Basically, the face modernized long before the brain case did. So what does this all mean? The crucial point here is how this single discovery shifted the entire scientific paradigm. Researcher Jean-Jacques Hublin framed this not as some weird localized anomaly, but as hardcore proof of a pan-African phenomenon. The argument he's making is that modern humans didn't just pop up fully formed in one tiny valley. Instead, our anatomy evolved gradually across the entire African continent. You've got multiple populations separated by massive geography, but they were connected by these occasional climate shifts that opened up migration corridors, and they were sharing anatomical innovations over hundreds of thousands of years. And then the ground shifted on us again in 2022. Remember that famous Omo eye fossil from Ethiopia, the very anchor of the old East African model? Well, it got redated using the layers of volcanic ash around it. The new minimum age came out to at least 233,000 years old. What this confirms for us is that modern human anatomy was popping up across a vast geographic range over a massively extended window of time. There just was no single origin moment at a fixed date. The starting line is completely blurred. So I want you to try and imagine discarding that image you've probably held on to for so long. The classic family tree. That clean, linear structure with a single trunk branching progressively out toward the diversity of living humans. It's just incomplete. The evidence we have today demands that we replace it with a much messier, but far more accurate reality. Think of it less like a tree and more like a braided river. And the genomic data completely backs up this braided river model. When researchers looked at the whole genome sequencing of the Khoisan peoples down in southern Africa, they modeled the population history hiding in their deep genetic roots. And they found evidence of major population splits going back as far as 350,000 years ago. This means you had multiple African streams of humanity separating, running parallel to each other, and then remerging over deep geological time. No single founding population, just this vast network of lineages flowing and converging into what we are now. And this story spills way beyond Africa. You carry Neanderthal DNA, literally.
If your ancestry traces anywhere outside of Africa, between 1 and 4% of your genome is inherited directly from Neanderthals. This happened because as our ancestors expanded out into Western Eurasia, they didn't just conquer and replace the archaic populations they ran into, they absorbed them. And we aren't talking about some trivial trace here. Those absorbed lineages actively shape things like your immune system responses to RNA viruses, your metabolism, and even the biology of your skin today.
The plot thickens even more as you move further east. Populations in East Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australasia carry Denisovan DNA, sometimes up to 6%. And again, these variants have a real functional impact on survival. Take Tibetan populations, for example. They carry the EPAS1 gene variant, which they inherited directly from Denisovans. It's the exact gene that helps their blood bind oxygen so they can breathe effectively at extreme high altitudes. We are absolutely a species heavily shaped by the very lineages we supposedly left behind.
Okay, the picture gets even deeper when we look closely at the genomes of modern West African populations. Genomic analysis reveals the statistical signal from an archaic hominin lineage that diverged from the ancestors of all living humans 500,000 years ago. We call them ghost lineages. Why? Because we have never found their bones, no fossils at all. Their existence is inferred entirely from the genetic signatures they left behind in modern DNA. The map of archaic admixture is literally still being drawn. This entirely shifting timeline changes how we understand human movement. Remember that classic model? It stated we left Africa 60,000 years ago, period. But fossils from Mislia Cave in Israel show a modern human jaw perfectly dated to 194,000 years ago. And in Laos, the Tampaling skull pushes dates in that region to 86,000 years ago. So that famous 60,000-year wave? It was really just the most genetically dominant dispersal, the one whose descendants make up the majority of non-African ancestry today. But it absolutely, without a doubt, was not the first time we left. All right, let's pause the narrative right here. This explainer is the culmination of 5 intense days of evidence. We have been examining the very edges of what it means to be human, looking closely at what the old consensus could simply not accommodate. It is time to put all 5 pieces together, not just as a summary, but to synthesize a truth that is much larger than its individual parts. Here is what the human origins arc actually adds up to, if you hold all 5 episodes together at once. We are not the product of a single founding population that emerged complete in one place at one time and spread out to replace everything else. We are the product of a braided river. Multiple African lineages that separated and rejoined over hundreds of thousands of years, that moved across a continent whose climate kept rewriting the map of where anyone could live, that absorbed Neanderthals in the Middle East and Denisovans in Asia and archaic African relatives whose names we do not yet know. The family tree was never the right image. The river is closer. And the river, it turns out, has no single source, only water that has been moving for a very long time, through channels we are still mapping. Homo floresiensis crossed an ocean in a way we still cannot fully explain, and survived until we were almost there to see her. The first Americans walked into an Ice Age interior in shoes we can still trace in the mud. Homo naledi carried something or someone into the dark of a chamber it had no easy reason to enter. The Red Deer cave people cooked deer in limestone caves at the edge of the world we call modern, with faces that looked older than they had any right to be. And all of that is part of what we are, not metaphorically, genetically, behaviorally. The line between us and them was never as clean as the textbooks made it. The arc is done. Season 2 continues. See you in the next one.